There is actually a saying of the Prophet that anyone with even an atom's weight of iman, which basically means faith in their heart, would not spend their entire time in the hellfire, even an atom's weight.
Okay, great.
Right,
now, I didn't know this. I assumed that you believed in infinite punishment in hell. Incidentally, as a quick... You do?
But for what you've said.
Only for what I just said.
Yeah, but here's what we would say, with caveat with this.
Yeah.
The only way to appropriately worship God is through his instruction. And the only way to do so through his instruction is through the prophets.
Yeah, you see, this is where I feel the small print might be sneaking back in, and it might be going, it might just be going, but given that anything you do which is against the teachings of, say, the Quran, would be offensive to God, ergo, if you do anything against teachings of the Quran, it's appropriate to go to hell infinitely. Yes? Are you saying that?
No.
Good. How not?
Because if you believe in those teachings and you believe in the word that God is worthy of worship, these are the predicate beliefs. If you have those beliefs even at an atom's weight, then you would be disqualified from an eternal punishment.
Good.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Yes. So,
still say our eyes have bewitched us.
Yeah.
So even if God is saying, if I was to show them the heavens and the earth, and they came and saw everything, they'll say this is just magic, you know, God.
Yeah. So I thought your answer was really good. Within the context of what you believe, it makes sense. It's self-consistent. Then my concern was, okay, but then although you balance the infinite punishment with the infinite transgression, it speaks hugely to an issue of determinism and free will, because now, have you seen the film Minority Report?
No, but can I come back on this point?
Yeah, sure.
And I don't want to go into too much technical detail, okay?
That it is determinism, the technical debate.
It's a technical topic. Okay. There is actually somebody called Najmuddin al-Tufi, who is a student of Ibn Taymiyyah, who wrote a book which was a book of jurisprudence. Actually, it's not relevant to eschatology or theodicy or theology.
Sorry, what's eschatology?
Eschatology is the study of the afterlife.
Okay.
Yeah, study of the afterlife. So what he said something, but it had been refuted. I'll say it. He said that one view, and that's his view, it's a very minority view, is that if God punishes us based on what we would have done, had we been completely free.
Sure.
That's his view. He says that because the question of if God knows everything, and you know that kind of question, and he's done qadr, he's predetermined everything, and how do we have free will? How does it work?
Yeah.
His view is he predicates it on what we would have done had there been an event whereby everybody would have been completely free without the determination of God. However, there is a problem with that line of reasoning. The problem is, from our perspective, well, from at least my perspective, a theological problem. Yeah. Which is that we believe that you are not to be held to account for something you would have done and you don't actually do. You are only held to account for that which you do.
Hang on.
There is a hadith that we like, a tradition that says that if a slave or a person decides to do a bad action but doesn't follow through with it, he is not given the sin for it, and so on. So that view, which is that what would have been the case, the possibility, the realm of possibility, though it is represented in the Islamic tradition, is not one I personally subscribe to. What I believe... Good, because that would have contradicted what Ali said, and I'll come on board...
But how does that, sorry, just because now I have an issue with you now.
Well, no, this is good. Let's have a chat.
Because the ayah is talking about me saying, okay, you know what, I'm going to go and slap you. But I don't do it. I get a good deed. This is an action in this realm. What Allah is talking about is what they would have done. How does that conflict?
No. So what Allah says is, He says, had they returned, they would have continued in what they were, the disbelief or whatever they've done. Yes. It's not saying that He predicated the judgment of their hellfire on that fact. He's just saying that this is a fact. He's not saying, therefore, because of that, we predicate our judgment on that fact.
So now that doesn't...
If they were to it's just a conditional.
Okay, that doesn't then totally tally with what... I'm not taking a pot, but it doesn't seem to totally tally with the way you described it to me. And I thought the way Ali sold it to me, it worked and it balanced.
Right. There is a view like that in Islam. But what I'm saying is, the truth of the matter is this: is that we believe if you don't enact something, you're not punished for it. The real way we put it is this: is that the presupposition, as I was explaining to you before, is that the punishment has to be proportionate in time with the crime.
Agreed.
And I'll give you this example.
That would be just and merciful. I'm seeking for a
Right.
just, merciful
So
God.
here's what I'm saying. Look, if this man here, this good-looking man, yes, he pulls out a knife.
Yeah.
Hopefully he doesn't, because that happened before some time ago.
Yeah,
Anyway,
no.
and he puts it and he kills me or kills this man next to him or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully no one actually does this. But let's say someone does that. Now he kills me, I said this to you before. And then he's presented in a court of law, and then the judge says to him, okay, the jury even, we're gonna decide on the appropriate punishment. And this man, strapping young man, he comes in front of the judge and he says, look, I want to be punished for exactly 1 second, because the time I spent to kill this man was 1 second.
Yeah.
Therefore, the punishment should be 1 second, because the crime took a second to commit. Now, someone will say, well, actually, that makes no sense, because actually, the gravity of the crime, despite it being a second, was enormous. The enormity of the gravity of the crime was huge. Therefore, this kind of reasoning wouldn't even apply.
I agree, it would be fatuous, okay?
Yes.
However, when you extend to infinity, infinity is a totally different order of measurement, yeah? Now, I'm not suggesting that a 1 second crime should have a 1 second punishment. It should be, to an extent, consequentialist and proportional. But once you start magnifying things to infinity, it means that even if everybody on the planet were to suffer torture for 100 years, it would still be less than if Dawood, God forbid, were to suffer infinite torture forever. That would still be more. Infinity just changes the whole ballgame.
Tony, there's something you've done here,
Yeah.
which requires justification on your part.
Yeah.
You said you agree with the fact that it's not always the case that if a person commits a crime,
Yeah.
that the punishment should be proportionate in crime.
Yeah.
But then you said that shouldn't extend to infinity. Now, this is a value judgment which requires a burden of proof. Actually, why would what would work and be operational on a finite level not be generalized to the infinite?
I would argue the burden of proof actually would be on you to prove the opposite, because I'm simply arguing that finite versus finite is inherently proportional and almost self-evidently, whereas infinity versus finite, the disparities. I think the burden of proof is with you.
This is the point. You're saying that justice entails that there should be proportionality in time in the infinite realm.
I'm saying that if I'm dealing with a just and merciful deity. If he's not just and merciful, then no.
No. But
Okay.
this is another question here, right? Because whether now you're introducing a theological element.
Yep.
Because in our first example, there was no theological element. So
Well, it arose within the context of a theological discussion about a just and merciful God.
That's right, but we do have a just and merciful God in the Islamic tradition.
Okay.
But not just and merciful God. We have a just and merciful and wise God.
Okay.
And there's many different attributes. So if we were to introduce two attributes, it would follow theologically that we should introduce all the attributes that are mentioned in the text. Do you see the point?
Yeah, but it would have to be self-consistent to all of those attributes.
Yeah,
so
obviously, yeah.
my one underlying principle is I seek self-consistency within a discipline and relative to other disciplines, yeah? So I think it's reasonable to look at any religion or ideology or human being and go, are they being self-consistent? And we all understand when people are not self-consistent. If somebody lies, or they're dishonest, or they're duplicitous, we all spot that instantly. So the acid test for truth seems to be self-consistency. And if I'm presented with a just and merciful God by Muslims and Christians, and I'm kind of a fan of both, okay? Then I expect to see acted out a just and merciful policy, and infinity versus the finite, infinite punishment for a finite transgression on the surface doesn't seem fair.
What I'll say to you is what you've outlined epistemologically is what is a necessary condition for truth, but according to the majority understanding is not a sufficient condition for truth.
I wasn't claiming it was sufficient, but I do think it's valid so far.
So you're saying that in order for truth to be truth, that it would have to be at least consistent.
It would need to tick that box.
Yes,
it doesn't mean it's automatically true.
That's what you're saying, then we agree. Now, so there's two aspects of burden that you have in terms of proving your postulation, if in fact you are making a claim. The first one would be that in the infinite realm, that punishment has to be proportionate in time. For example, had someone committed X crime in the finite realm, that should not translate to Y punishment in the infinite realm.
Yeah.
This is a claim. You can't say.
Yeah, no, I am making that claim.
All right, great. So you would have to provide evidence for that claim. You see,
I don't think the burden of proof is on me.
It's definitely.
I don't think you can shut down that. I think it's a natural human response if you're seeking self-consistency,
No, but
to argue that that is a disproportionate situation.
That
But Ali squared the circle. He did square the circle. I
But
could move the debate
before
on.
we get to Ali's squaring of the circle,
Okay.
let's go back.
Isn't that impossible?
Okay.
No, but let's
circle.
Well, we're going into necessary and contingent existences, aren't we? Yeah.
What I'm saying to you is,
Yeah.
if you make a claim, you have to have some level of justification for that claim.
I do. Truth is self-consistent.
Truth
If
is
the
self-
properties of God are justice and merciful, it strikes
Wait,
me,
wait,
and we
sorry.
could
Yeah.
poll the crowd
No.
on whether they think
That's fallacy.
infinite. Okay,
Because the crowd could be ignorant.
I agreed,
Yeah.
but just as an opening.
But the fact that he's there is definitely
Okay.
some level of ignorance.
Okay,
inside.
okay.
I'm only joking. I'm only
Okay,
joking.
I would.
Sorry, go ahead.
I would. We'll just get entrenched here. I would contest that the burden of proof would be on you to show that infinite punishment for
No,
finite.
you were saying something important. You said
Go on.
that you expect self-consistency.
Yeah.
And then you said that the attributes of God are X and Y.
Well,
And then you said-
Islam, I think, claims justice and mercy. So does
right.
Christianity. So it's a good wide debate.
No
yeah?
problem, but
Good.
that's not all it claims, right?
For sure.
So it claims other attributes. So we can't select. If we want to say that we're talking about God's attributes as per X theological tradition, we have to include all the attributes of God.
Absolutely,
as per
but it shouldn't contravene any of that
So,
multiplicity.
yeah, great,
Yes, we agree.
accepted, meaning that these attributes cannot contradict each other.
Yeah,
basically.
self-consistency. We both have the same
Accepted.
litmus test for truth.
Accepted. But here's what you have to understand now about the Islamic tradition. That the way we conceive of the attributes of God is in a tripartite classification. So what you have is you have what you refer to as the intrinsic attributes of God. Then you have the will of God, and then you have what you refer to as the action-based attributes of God. So, for instance, an intrinsic attribute of God is his necessities, oneness, or the power of God, the omnipotence of God, the omniscience of God, and so on. The will is an intrinsic attribute of God, but it directs the actions of God.
Sure.
Now, so what I'm saying is that there are some things God can decide to do and can decide to offset or post-date. For instance, because God has will, which we can, if you want, argue on first principles. Because God has will, He decides to do X rather than Y, or Y rather than X, because this is by definition what volition is. Which means he can suspend the actions of X attribute in favor of the actions of Y, and he can perform the actions of Y attribute rather than the actions of X, and he does so based on perfect knowledge, which is the intrinsic attribute of God. Does this make sense? Let me say it one more time.
Hang on, you asked me if it makes sense.
Doesn't make sense.
It could, but it could also be interpreted as a circular argument which gives him carte blanche to do whatever he wants, because it means that phenomenologically he doesn't have to be self-consistent with the way he's presented himself thus far. So although it might be a valid interpretation of reality, it's not a given.
You would have to demonstrate the circularity.
I could also point out, just as a sideline, and we won't go here, it's interesting that you are happy to suddenly have a vaguely Trinitarian nature to God, when I know with the Christian, you can understand the idea of therefore breaking one thing down into three, yes?
Well, of course.
Good. It would be nice to, in the endless debates with the Christians, if occasionally they didn't just keep hammering the Trinity. Okay.
Listen to me.
Yeah.
Tony,
Okay. Yeah.
there's a world of difference between talking about three persons and three types of attributes. So you're clever enough to understand that.
Yeah, I am.
Let me give you.
I just don't believe this. I don't believe that you guys can't buy the idea of, just for a second, that hydrogen 2 plus oxygen, as a molecule, we'll all agree it's one thing, but it can manifest as a gas, it can manifest as ice, and it can manifest as a vapor. Now, I'm not expecting you to buy the Trinity.
Are you a Christian?
Of sorts.
Okay. Well,
A Christian wouldn't think so. I like religion. I think religion's got good shit to say.
Listen to me.
Yes, Mohammed. Yes.
What you've described is a modal understanding of God.
Correct.
Now, in modern day Christian understanding, we talk about Protestantism, Catholicism, and this is seen as heretical because you have.
I'm not subscribed to that.
No problem. Let's just put that out there. First of all, why this is problematic, and even is seen as problematic by the majority of philosophers of religion. William Haskell, even I believe William Lane Craig, others see this as a problematic kind of understanding, and have some other analogies to present, is because it suggests that God can be X form or Y form or Z form. What can't happen is that water is water and ice and gas at the same time. All three doesn't.
No, we agree, but we would also agree that simultaneously its essential nature.
Are you with me, Tony?
You know what? I've digressed the conversation. I
know you have,
apologise.
but no, let's just get this out of the way.
No, this could take time.
I know. But what I'm saying is, modalism is the idea that God changes. The Father changes to the Son changes to the Holy Spirit. That you have different modes of God. But this is why this is heretical on mainstream's understanding of Christianity, is because the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is something which should always exist co-eternally, co-equally, and so on. But with the modal understanding, there's transformation going on. If you're talking about water to ice and ice to gas, then when water is ice, it's not gas, and when it's gas, it's not ice. And
no,
so
but it's always H2O.
But what we're saying is,
it's always H2O.
No, but that's irrelevant because we're saying that the form has changed. If you apply this to God, Father, Son,
an aspect of the form has changed, but ontologically, the essence of the thing is consistent. I don't have to defend the people who are traditionalists because I'm not one.
No, but remember, on the traditional Trinitarian understanding, there is no idea of the Father being either the Father or the Son or the Holy Spirit at any given time. It's the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit at all times.
To be clear, I don't subscribe to a literal Christian or Muslim interpretation.
Going back to
let's go back to do the Trinity.
When we talk about self-consistency,
yeah,
we're talking about we have to differentiate.
We're getting necklaces here. It's like we're building.
We have to differentiate between parts and attributes. Now H2O is 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom.
Yeah.
Now what I say is that anything that is made out of pieces is dependent. H2O is made out of pieces, therefore H2O is dependent. Now that doesn't apply to God because there's a world of difference between attributes and parts.
I literally only meant this. I meant as thank you. As an analogy for how something can be intrinsically one thing but have 3 facets. I think just as an analogy, you can wrap your head around it. That was all I was saying. Because when Muslims seem to be mystified by the idea of a Trinity, I would hope that at least they can embrace the analogy and then reject it.
No, let's be honest. Christians have been, if you want to call it that, mystified and confused about the idea of the Trinity, which is why you've had different schools of thought, modalism being one of them, tritheism being on the opposite end of the spectrum. So if it was a straightforward idea, which is unmystified or otherwise unencoded, or it's not, there's no element of confusion in it, then there wouldn't have been such an
all I think is it's a tenable idea to explore. I'm not saying it's proven, and you may well be right.
But we've explained why this idea is problematic.
It's definitely problematic, but that doesn't kill it.
Let's go back to the justice.
I believe it does kill it. But let's move on to the next bit.
Okay.
The idea is that you said something important. I said there's a tripartite classification or categorization or compartmentalization of the attributes of God: intrinsic, will, and verbal attributes.
Okay, I'll buy that provisionally for now.
What I'm saying is that there is a difference, and we have to make this difference between parts and attributes, because if I were to tell you, right, that you have an electric razor, and then you have a cutthroat razor.
Yeah.
Right, the electric razor has many different parts.
Yep.
Yeah. Now the cutthroat razor has no parts, but has more attributes. Has more functional attributes, because you can cut an orange with it and you can cut a throat with it.
Yeah.
So you can do more with a cutthroat razor than you can with the electric razor, despite the fact that the electric razor has more parts.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that we must be able to differentiate between centers of consciousness, A, and or parts on the one hand, or attributes on the other. With the Trinity example, you have 3 centers of consciousness. We go to the electric razor example. We're not going to the cutthroat razor example. With the Islamic understanding is, we're going to the cutthroat razor example. We're saying God is not composed of pieces, and therefore we can, just because God is simple doesn't mean it doesn't have many attributes. Just like a cutthroat razor can do many things functionally.
Okay, for the record,
so
hang on, can I just share a bit? Okay, for the record, I think monism, monistic religion, is the ideal way to go. You guys are very big on it. Congratulations. Okay, so I think monism. I'm on board with monism. I suspect that the Christians think that they can incorporate the concept of a Trinity, maybe in a metaphorical sense, within a monistic framework, and that may be tenable, and that your hostility to it as a metaphor is maybe undue. But I think both religions, all the Abrahamic religions, are essentially monistic, and that's a good thing. Yeah. It's just a shame when so much time gets spent here constantly banging on about 2 particular things, where the Christians come at you guys about certain aspects of Muhammad. I'd like to get. We should get. Sorry, it was my fault. It was my fault.
No, but these are important preambles. Monism is something else. We can talk about this.
Yeah, we can.
And to what extent it can be interpreted within the Islamic framework, but that's a different discussion.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what you talked about today.
Yeah.
Now the question is, how can we establish? Because to say something is just or unjust requires a theory of justice.
Yeah. Mine is that it's equivalent, it's balanced, yeah? an eye for if you take an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And I don't believe in that. But the concept of live by the sword, die by the sword, in Christianity, there are whole references. In Buddhism, there are references to there being some equivalence of cause and effect, yeah? Now,
yes.
I think that's common to most religions, and I expect that to be reflected in the justice system.
Well, here's the problem. And this is the argument I make. It's called the argument from divine value, okay?
Okay.
I'm making this, I'll put this argument to you.
Uh-huh.
I've said this before and speak this before, but I'm going to say it again. You see this tree behind you right there, yeah?
Tell him one more time.
I'm saying it one time. This tree behind you. Now, if I get this tree and I cut it up into little pieces, all right, it's a living tree, accepted. Now, you might think that's a reprehensible action. I don't know. Maybe you think it's okay. It's fine, depending on what the motivation is.
Yeah.
But now, if I get a small child from St. Mary's Hospital that's just been born,
I feel differently. Yeah.
and I cut that baby into little pieces, is it equivalent according to you, or is it different?
No, because you're contravening the will of the child, whereas the tree hasn't got a will.
Right, great. So what you've basically made is an attributional difference. That the child has some attribute that the tree doesn't have, which makes me transgressing against the rights of the child more reprehensible than me transgressing
Well, I don't think the tree has any rights, so it's not a problem.
No problem. It's living, so I mean there are some similarities.
It doesn't cross the line for me. It doesn't feel anything, so I don't care.
No, but they do say trees will communicate with each other. But
Oh no, if the tree feels something, it's got rights. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
We can make the argument. But what I'm saying is the difference between the tree and the baby is an attributional difference.
Yeah.
Now, what we are saying is when the object of transgression becomes infinite in its attribution quantity.
Hang on, stop. Sorry, just got to absorb that. That's a biggie. And for your viewers as well, that's going to be a biggie.
Welcome to my life.
Okay, fine. When the what?
Okay.
When the attribute.
You have subject and object.
Correct. Good.
Subject
Excellent.
is me.
Yeah.
Now, object is I'm holding my mobile phone.
Excellent.
So I'm doing something to the object.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm doing something to the tree is the object.
Correct.
If I'm doing something to the baby is the object.
And simultaneously a subject, which is why it has rights.
No,
yes.
I am the subject and the baby is an object.
No, in that situation, you're both ontologically, you are both subjects, and the reason that you're
doing something, if it's passive.
and the reason that what you're doing is offensive is precisely because you're affecting another subject.
Oh yeah,
if it was just
no,
right, so we
I
agree.
meant in the grammatical term. There's subject and object in sentences, yeah?
I meant it ontologically, sorry.
So the one
I'm into the Cartesian divide of subject and object.
No,
I'm coming from that.
Okay. I'm talking grammar.
Sorry, you meant grammar.
Yeah.
Apologies. Right.
Subject, object.
Okay.
I cut the tree. I am the subject, that is the object.
Apologies. Yes, you're right. It's grammatical. Sorry.
Right.
I thought you were being Cartesian.
No. That's what I mean by object. It's good that you asked.
Okay.
Now, if I am now, we said the difference between the tree and the baby is attributional. That the baby has attribute, which is in this case will, and the tree doesn't have. Now I say, if that's the case, then the more of such attribute the object has, the more of a crime transgressing against the object is. And in this case, we say that God has an infinite level of, for example, power attribute, knowledge attribute, and so on. He's worthy of worship from our paradigm. And so transgressing against the ultimate in attributional quantity means that to you belongs the highest level of punishment. Because if I cut the tree into two pieces, I shouldn't be punished, I think you'd agree, in the same way if I cut the baby into two pieces. Because the object has more attribute. But with God, the attribute is so intense and is infinite in attributes, which means if I transgress against that object, which means I should be given the highest punishment even if it's for a little bit of time.
Crime is done against infinite, the punishment is infinite.
Can I just take this on board now, okay?
Sure,
right, so the first conversation I had with Ali, I was surprised because I thought he balanced the two infinites, and I had to concede that and I would have moved on to a discussion on determinism, because I think the negative overflowed to that. You've now hit me with a new thing, which I hadn't heard before and I'm taking on board, right? And it seems to me, no offense, your argument is cogent, but it might also involve a little bit of circular sleight of hand, because what seems to be being said maybe is that effectively anything you do which contravenes God law is an effect against an infinite being with infinite faculties, and therefore infinite punishment is appropriate. Now, I can see that as a cogent line of argument. I can also see maybe it's not such a cogent line of argument in terms of you've now got the circular framework in which you can argue that anything you do against God is an infinite transgression, whereas at least in a secular sense, and I know we would secularly agree that our view of fair play would be that the crime is against the individual baby, and not the baby isn't an infinite being, and therefore it should be. You get what I'm saying?
Let me put it in a syllogism.
Can I confirm that you understand my point?
Let me put it in a syllogism for you, and tell me where it's circular, right?
Yeah.
the higher the attributional value an object has, the more the punishment should be for the subject.
You could argue that, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree.
Great.
I need to think about it, but
Premise
go on.
2,
Yeah.
God's attributional value
It's infinite. Therefore, yeah.
Therefore,
Yeah. You've given
no.
Yeah.
That's not right. That's not right. It should
Okay.
be the level of punishment of the object
Yeah.
is concurrent. The subject
Yeah.
is concurrent with the level of the attributional value of the object. The attributional value of the subject of the object of God is infinite. Therefore, the punishment should be infinite.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying, but what you're doing with that, and it may be legitimate or it may not, you're deflecting the focus of the sin. In the original example, sorry, Ali, if I don't mind. In the original example, I am, say, I don't want to stab Ali, that's such a bad analogy. Right, whatever, okay?
By the way, you know he's not negating what I said. He's saying this is another.
Well, yeah, but I'm interested in how it ties up. But if I commit a crime against Ali, then he is the object who doesn't have infinite qualities, and therefore that my punishment shouldn't be infinite, yeah? But you're arguing that the fact that I've sinned against Ali contravenes God's law, and because God is infinite, therefore anything I do, even if it's a finite transgression, automatically should have infinite repercussions, yes?
No. What you've done there is different.
Well, then I've misquoted
No,
you.
because the subject here is not God directly.
Yeah, I'm the subject, I'm the sinner,
Sorry,
yeah?
the object is not God. Because when we say the object, what necessitates an eternity of punishment in the hellfire is not you going against a being with finite quantity.
Infinite.
With finite qualities like Ali.
Yeah, I did, because that
If
wouldn't
you
work.
go against him, you wouldn't go to hell forever. That doesn't work like that.
Yeah, right.
You only go to hell forever when you commit shirk, which is associating partners with God, or you commit kufr, which is denying God in the first place is worthy of worship, for example, right?
Yeah.
Now, what I'm saying is, in those two examples, the direct object of transgression is God, but not just in the sense that you're going against his law. He is actually the object of inappropriate. So let me tell you how, right?
So hang on, just to be clear.
Yeah.
So you're saying, it's prima facie, it seemed to me you were saying that because you contravene his law, and you're not just saying that, but you are saying that.
No, not the law. No.
So it's not because I contradict his law?
Nothing to do with the law here.
Go on.
The law wasn't actually made. Even the syllogism I said, I never said the word
Okay.
law. When I say going against, right? So inappropriacy, because in the Arabic, zulm, which means oppression, is basically inappropriacy. Inappropriacy is what our shaykh fi ghayri makanihi sahih, putting something in other than its inappropriate place. That's literally what zulm or oppression means. So our theory of justice is inappropriacy. The more inappropriate you are, the more oppressive you are. So how are you inappropriate with God? You're inappropriate when you redirect the worship you owe God to other than God. And that is what I mean by when you're transgressing against the object. You're transgressing against the object in so much as, so this God with infinite, whatever it may be, knowledge, power and so on, you are redirecting the veneration and worship you should have with that God to something with limited of those variables, X, Y, Z variables, and that inappropriacy deserves an infinite punishment because there's an infinite gap there, if you like.
Okay, now it sounds to me like you're describing the sin of idolatry and it would work for that.
Yes, only
okay.
that. Only that.
Okay, but the sin of me,
Shirk and kufr.
the sin of me hurting the baby is not a sin of idolatry.
Exactly.
It's a sin against the
So we
baby.
want to say that baby, hurting the baby, killing the baby, anything that does not by itself mean that you'll spend the hellfire all time in the hellfire forever.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Okay, I didn't. So you don't believe in?
It's just polytheism, and it's just kufr or disbelief that guarantees you the eternity. Nothing else guarantees.
Oh, God, so then maybe so it's only idolatry and offence against God on a more personal level, which gives you infinite punishment.
Or disbelief in Him as worthy of worship and redirecting that worship.
Hang on, no, hold it. Sorry, disbelief in Him. Now, I would take if I disbelieve in your particular representation of God, which may be accurate or may not. I consider that what I've done there is make a finite choice with finite faculties, and therefore it's a finite transgression.
No, but if you are redirecting your veneration and worship, which is the appropriate connection you should have with the all-knowing necessary being,
Yeah.
the independent one, if you redirect that action
Yeah.
to something which is dependent and finite and contingent and so on, then what you're doing is you are fulfilling the syllogism, if you like.
Yeah.
It's only in that action
But
where the ultimate punishment will be justified.
Okay, so as long as I'm in some way sort of offending God in person, infinite
You
punishment.
said that beautiful.
Does that
Yeah,
work?
Yeah, excellent.
Okay.
So long as what you're doing is being inappropriate
Yeah.
with the worship of God,
Yeah.
qua God,
Mm-hmm.
then that is where the eternal punishment comes. That's why we actually have hadith.
Okay, so we have an agreement. I can understand.
Yes.
I'm not saying I agree with it, but I
Yeah.
can understand it cogent. So,
So what we
if
say-
if I offend God personally, then infinite punishment is appropriate because God is an infinite being.
Yes.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Excellent.
If you
Okay.
die-
No, but do you know
Now.
what I say?
you die upon
On this point,
Okay.
that's why there is actually a saying of the Prophet
Yeah.
that anyone with even an atom's weight of
Yeah.
iman, which basically means faith in their heart,
Yeah.
would not spend their entire time in the hellfire, even
Good.
an atom's weight.
Okay, great.
Right,
No,
so-
I didn't know this. I assumed that you believed in infinite punishment in hell. Incidentally, as a quick,
we do.
you do
For what you've said.
only for what I just said.
Yeah, but here's what we would say, with caveat with this.
Yeah.
The only way to appropriately worship God
Yeah.
is through His instruction. And the only way to do so through His instruction is through the prophets.
Yeah, you see,
And-
this is where I feel the small print might be sneaking back in, and it might be
small
going,
print
it might just be going,
There's no small-
but given that anything you do which is against the teachings of, say, the Quran, would be offensive to God, ergo, if you do anything against teachings of the Quran, it's appropriate to go to
But if you believe in
hell
those teachings-
infinitely.
No, but if you
Yes?
be- no, it's-
Are you saying that?
No.
Good. How not?
Because if you believe in those teachings and you
Yeah.
believe in the word that God is worthy of worship, these are the predicate beliefs.
Uh-huh.
If you have those beliefs even at an atom's weight,
Yeah.
then you would be disqualified from an eternal punishment.
Good.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Yes.
So you can
Okay,
see-
so do you know what I've learned from, doing this circle about hell? Because I asked Bob, you might like this, I asked Bob the Builder. Turns out Bob doesn't believe in infinite punishment in hell either. Yeah, and I didn't know this. During the discussion, I discovered he believes that either you go to heaven or you kind of fade into nothingness and cease to exist. And he says it's not a standard Christian view, but it's one he subscribed to. He showed me it in the Bible. Now, that was nice to discover. It's also nice to discover that you don't necessarily believe in infinite punishment in hell.
Definitely in all cases.
Okay, but to a lot of people who are laymen coming into this, we think you believe that, and it sounds draconian, but neither you nor Bob
I mean,
actually believe
yes.
anything quite that hard line.
One more thing,
Yeah.
to be fair, and this might sound controversial,
Uh-huh.
but Ibn Taymiyyah, who he didn't believe, like Ibn Taymiyyah is one of the heavyweight scholars,
Uh-huh.
he has two views, all right? So one, he says that eternal punishment in the hellfire is sanctionable, and,
Yep.
and the other one is not.
Okay.
And the truth of the matter is, his student, which is Ibn Qayyim, in his book Shfa' al-Alil,
Yeah.
he basically takes the view that hellfire runs out even for disbelievers.
Good.
So, I don't know
Good.
if
No,
it's
good.
I disagree with
It feels more just and merciful, and therefore it feels more
It might be good or
self-consistent.
bad, but I'm
Yeah.
just telling you that this is a view, even though it's aberrational. It is an aberrational view.
We don't believe that.
You don't believe.
I personally don't subscribe. Like I said to you, with Tufi, there might be
forever.
views.
You
that-
do. You do believe it's forever,
Those who
but
die-
only if it's against
for
God.
those, No, for those who die in idolatry, it's
Yeah.
forever.
Okay.
Yes.
That still to me feels harsh. Maybe I'm a bit of a
But
snowflake,
you know,
right?
Can
But
I add
hey.
one thing, Tony?
Yeah.
You know when you said, for example, that's not just. In order for you to truly comprehend and understand
Yeah.
the violation, you need to. You can't comprehend because what's happened here is you're assuming, and it's you're right, you're a human being.
Yeah.
You're saying, well, that's not just. One thing Allah says in the Quran is that the people in the hellfire are never going to say, you wronged us. This is very interesting because they're in hellfire,
Yeah.
and the God's telling us they're burning.
And they still don't learn their lesson even in hell.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, yeah. And what the point is here, none of them say the following.
No,
You
in the
oppressed
hellfire
us.
they know what's going on.
Yeah,
Okay,
no,
but
they're
they don't
not
recant.
No, they recant. They do recant.
But it's too late.
It's too
Yeah,
late.
it's too late.
That's rough. That is rough. That is
No,
rough.
one second.
If you sincerely recant,
No,
you
but-
know.
No,
but
what does Allah
recanting
say?
in what domain?
No, but it goes.
In what dimension?
But Tony, it
It's
goes.
too late.
Tony,
You
it
know
goes
what I
back to what I said to you. Because Allah says, if they were to send back, because what they say to Allah, they say, give us a chance. It's very interesting. They don't say, oh God, why are you making us suffer in hellfire forever?
Yeah.
Just because we just committed adultery. They don't say that. They say, give us a chance.
Yeah.
And the point here is, the fact that they say, give us a chance, shows something very interesting. It shows that God's justice is done in such a perfect way, they are not complaining of being in the fire. They accept and know they deserve being in the fire forever.
Yeah.
They're asking for a chance. Which means, because we don't comprehend what shirk is, like what associating partners to God is, we fall in a contradictory, like within our thought process of, but hold on a second, we can't fathom it. It's
Sure.
such a great sin. We believe there is no sin on this earth that can come close to shirk. So just so you understand.
I think you're arguing to a level of mysticism, maybe, that I think.
No, what I'll say to you, Tony, is this. So what we did here, if you...
I'm not knocking it. I think God is beyond our understanding to an extent, and therefore mysticism's appropriate.
Let's review something, okay? We've spoken for about 20 to 30 minutes about...
Yeah, let's wrap up here.
We were going to do determinism. Can we do determinism another time, then?
Yeah, of course.
Cool.
But what I'm saying is that we spoke for 20 to 30 minutes about hellfire, and I've given you the argument from divine value.
Which I appreciate.
Yeah, and I've shown you how, and you said it's cogent. And
it's cogent. I'm not saying I'm buying it, but I'm buying that it's cogent within its own framework.
Right.
Yeah?
Beautiful. Now, here's what I want to say to you is that's perfect. That's all you can do right now.
Yeah.
Because I know it might feel emotionally off-putting.
And intellectually a bit, but carry on.
No, but intellectually we've already explained it's cogent. That's the intellectual value judgment.
Yeah. But there are other cogent intellectual ways of looking at it as well.
What we're saying is cogent. Yeah, 100%, no doubt. I'm not saying it's the only conceivable possibility. Definitely.
Good.
What I am saying is, so long as it's cogent, now what we really need to discover
Yeah.
is whether the authority of the Quran and Sunnah is actually justified or not. If it is, then this is something which is rational and reasonable. If it's not, according to you, then you don't need to accept it in the first place.
I think, I don't know.
But that's what we really need to investigate, because it's like we're talking about...
I think you may be handicapping yourself here by placing, you're not going to like this, the emphasis that I think you have on the literal truth of every syllable of the Quran, I think might be a bit of a dead weight for what is a very good religion. Oh, you don't?
No.
I didn't know that. I'm learning shit all the time.
Yeah, no. We don't have that. I don't think anyone, only person that really believed that there's no metaphors in the Quran.
Sweet. Okay, good. So then one of the questions is, what's the latitude on the metaphors, yeah? And this is what Hadith is about, is how you interpret this stuff, yeah? Well, these are the constructive discussions, I think, to have more of in Speaker's Corner, and maybe less of just the bear baiting between extremes of positions, yeah?
Sure, the determinism question is an important one as well.
Which we can come to, but not now.
I think the best thing we can do first, I think, especially is to establish the existence of God and what kind of God we're talking about from first principles. Because when we get that, that is really that's the root of the tree, and everything else comes as...
Well, you're going to go for the cosmological argument.
No.
You're not?
No.
Okay.
I advocate a different kind of argument, not the Kalam cosmological argument of William Lane Craig.
I've watched an 8-minute video of you going...
That was about 6 years ago.
Okay, I don't want to hold you to it because you're allowed to change your position, but I watched that.
No, it's not like I don't have a problem. It's not like I disagree with the findings of the cosmological argument. That's not the argument I would present.
Okay.
The argument I would present is a very simple one, if you want to do it quickly, right?
Look, dude, I'm loving this conversation. I like having constructive ones, and I didn't know this was going to happen. We've covered a bit of it. I'd love to do with you determinism and the cosmological argument, or your version of it, another time. Would that be good?
Yeah.
Sweet. Okay.
Fantastic.
Then we had a nice chat. Thank you very much. Thank you. Listen, can I big up Dawood, please, on camera? Because Dawood is...
How can you big him up when he's already bigged up?
Well, I want to big him up even more. I've just seen Dawood very consistently doing terrific broadcasts on YouTube. The speech he made last week, everybody should watch, about how this is a community, and it was very heartfelt and more eloquent than I can be. So watch this guy when he's online. Look out for him. He's great, and he's on Ali Dawa's team. And he's on both of your teams. You're all part of one team, and he's a really good guy. So I just had to say that.
You don't have to tell me. But
terrific.
Thank you for saying it.
Great. And thank you very much. And Ali, wherever he's gone, thank you. Another time. Cheers.
Well, we're just going to pray now.
And I'll give you back your necklace.
Thanks, Tony.
Cheers, dude. Pleasure.
It's been very nice. I've learned a lot from
Pleasure.
both
That was a good
sides.
chat. That was a good chat.
Very, very strong. Very strong mind you have.
I didn't know that was going to happen. That was good. Somebody should probably take this because I need to go.
I'm Sam Dow.
I will do this for you.
Thank you.
Which one?
All of them, give me.
All of them, yeah? Sam Dow.